Okay, everyone, a lot of people ask me about things like second residencies or moving to lower cost of living countries, especially if you're an expat who can move to almost anywhere in the world, or if you have an online business for that matter, where you can move around the world. So I'm going to compare two different countries now. I'm going to compare Bulgaria and Georgia, because generally speaking, when people think of low cost of living countries, they think of the Far East, Southeast Asia like Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand. But I think in recent times, those countries have become a bit more hard when it comes to things like visas, even sometimes cost of living, right? So people these days who, for example, want to go outside their own country, buy a property, or indeed have quite an easy life when it comes to things like the burdens of bureaucracy. Some of the Eastern European countries, and then going a bit further into Georgia, which is obviously more the Caucasus region, which is in between Asia and Europe, can offer a good alternative. So I'm going to compare these two countries and my impression of both countries. Now, number one, when it comes to the visa, it depends where you are from. Now, of course, if you're an EU citizen, or indeed you're from the greater European area, like Switzerland, Norway, whatever, of course, Bulgaria is much easier than Georgia, right? Because you can come to Bulgaria. But Georgia is incredibly liberal compared to almost any country in the world, even Cambodia, for visas. In other words, regardless where you're from, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Europe, wherever, you can get 360 days visa, usually at the airport. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be a few exceptions to that. There might be one or two countries in Europe, whatever, that aren't applicable. You'd have to check online. But in general, it's very liberal. That doesn't mean you can legally work here for a local company. But of course, that could give you, say, a couple of months to get yourself sorted or whatever. So it's very liberal. And one thing I would say about Georgia compared to somewhere like Bulgaria is the processes are very easy, it seems. In other words, I talked about the bank in the last video. There wasn't really anything that was needed apart from that, although things like a Georgian phone number, which you can get from the airport, were in reality often a help. But what was interesting really about Georgia is that things seem very easy on the bureaucracy side. So whether it comes to buying a property, whether it comes to opening a bank account, whether it comes to visas, everything is very, very easy. Whereas when it comes to Bulgaria, visas might be easy if you are from the EU, but if you're not, it's not always easy. And processes like whether it's going to the bank or whatever, the bureaucracy is much, much worse in Bulgaria. Now, when it comes to cost of living, I would say it's comparable, but Georgia's a bit cheaper. And now, when it comes to most things, it's very comparable, like going to the shops or whatever. Of course, there's a range and so on. But Georgia, on average, for eating out and probably rent is a bit cheaper. I would say English is relatively similar in both countries, right? At least in the capital cities, there isn't a huge difference, I think, between the English levels. And attitudes don't seem that different. Georgia seems probably the most international of the Caucasus countries. Now, buying property seems relatively similar in terms of prices. In terms of in Tbilisi, I was looking at some properties and a lot of them were like 50, 60, 80 square meters, and they were costing anything from like $70,000 or $80,000. That's not that different to Bulgaria, but of course it depends on which area of Bulgaria. You can find some areas of Bulgaria which is cheaper, but I'm talking about the capital cities, Sofia to Tbilisi. It's relatively similar. I think the only difference is the rental yields are probably a bit higher in Georgia if you go down the Airbnb route. And a key difference is this. When it comes to second residency programs, that is one area where Georgia is much more liberal than Bulgaria. In terms of if you put $100,000 down for a property, you can have 0% tax on your overseas income. So say, for example, you've got someone who's got an online business, is making $500,000 a year, is living in Sweden, Australia, whatever, half of their income is going to tax. If you come to live in Georgia and you basically put down $100,000 for the property, it takes, I think, about 6 to 8 weeks to actually get the residency. Basically, you can legally pay 0% tax on your overseas income, but any Georgian income from, say, real estate, renting or whatever, will be taxed. Whereas when it comes to Bulgaria, if you actually want to stay in Bulgaria and you're from, say, outside of the EU, it's a lot more difficult. They do have some kind of golden visa program, but it's much higher than $100,000, and I'm not sure if it can be done from property. So what I would say in general is Georgia's probably an easier place in terms of the processes. But one thing I would say is, in general, Bulgaria feels a little bit more developed, with the exception of the processes. What I mean by that is, when I came to the airport in Georgia, there was literally about 5 stray dogs outside, almost coming into the airport. and also the general streets or whatever, even in the nice areas of Tbilisi, I think it just feels like Bulgaria did maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You could say that means there's more opportunities, and indeed the GDP growth is higher in Georgia than in Bulgaria, or indeed I think in Romania as well. But it's less developed, I would say, in terms of the general feel. The only thing that's much easier, and I would say this is much easier, is any processes, right, which come from government regulation, whether that's getting the visa for the 100 grand, whether that's opening a bank account, whether that's the visa, like actually at the airport if you just want to be a tourist, whether that's buying property, whether that's paying for property tax, whatever. It seems like on the government side, it's a more free market government. Bulgaria is quite free market. It's only got 10% flat tax for most people, but the processes are still very much, I wouldn't say communist times, but it's much more rigid than somewhere like Georgia. Okay, everyone, have a good day.